a first in lunar exploration. No one successfully landed near the moon's south pole before.
Any more glorious than the day Neil Armstrong stepped foot on the moon.
The Apollo program is a huge milestone in human history, mainly because of Apollo 11 and that iconic moon landing. When Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin took those first steps on the moon, it was a moment that blew everyone away. But after that huge achievement, NASA didn't really follow through. Plans for a second moon landing just kind of faded, with budget cuts and changing priorities pushing it aside. So, what exactly happened? Why did NASA stop trying to go back after Apollo 11? Elon Musk even mentioned this, saying he'd reveal why NASA hasn't returned to the moon. The whole Apollo program, though, goes way beyond just the moon landing. Sure, Apollo 11 is the most famous, but the whole program spanned decades and involved so many missions and innovations that pushed humanity's limits in space. The program kicked off in the early 1960s, around the same time the US was racing with the Soviet Union in the space race. The foundation was laid by NASA, which had been created in response to the USSR's early successes. But before any astronauts could actually land on the moon, there was a major setback. Apollo 1 was meant to be the first manned mission, but it ended in tragedy before it even launched. On January 27, 1967, Apollo 1 was supposed to be a test run in low Earth orbit. It was just a system check, nothing too crazy. But during a pre-launch test, a fire broke out in the pure oxygen environment inside the spacecraft, and tragically, the crew, Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger B. Chaffee, lost their lives. The mission was immediately called off. It was a massive blow to NASA, but it also led to a major overhaul in how they approached everything. The space module was redesigned, and NASA took extra care in testing and improving all of the spacecraft systems. The loss of these astronauts wasn't in vain, though. Their sacrifice set the tone for what would follow. NASA pushed forward with even more determination, learning from the tragedy and using it to guide future missions. And while the program continued, there was still that lingering question of why the big plans to return to the moon were put on hold. It wasn't until October 1968, nearly 2 years after the tragedy of Apollo 1, that the Apollo program finally got some real success. Apollo 7 was the first manned flight in the program since the disaster, and it marked a huge milestone. This mission was essential for testing the spacecraft systems that would eventually take astronauts to the moon. It wasn't a moon landing mission yet, but Apollo 7's success was key. The crew spent 11 days in space, testing the Apollo command module in low Earth orbit. They confirmed that the spacecraft's life support systems, guidance, and navigation were all working as expected. Despite some technical hiccups along the way, the mission showed that the spacecraft was ready for future crewed missions, paving the way for what would come next. Apollo 7 might have been the first big step after the disaster, but it wasn't long before Apollo 8 made history. The Apollo 8. In December 1968, Apollo 8 became the first mission to send astronauts around the moon. What's crazy is that this wasn't even part of the original plan. NASA had initially intended Apollo 10 to be the mission that took the first humans to the moon, but after Apollo 7's success, and with time running short, the decision was made to send a crew on a test flight around the moon instead. This mission was all about making sure the spacecraft could travel to the moon, orbit it, and safely return to Earth. Apollo 8 launched on December 21, 1968, and once they got to lunar orbit, the crew made adjustments to their trajectory and successfully entered a stable orbit around the moon. This mission was particularly significant because it was the first time humans ever saw the far side of the moon, and it gave the crew the chance to witness that stunning Earthrise, Earth rising above the lunar horizon. After 10 orbits around the moon, Apollo 8 made it safely back to Earth on December 27, 1968. Then came Apollo 9, which was the first mission to test the lunar module, the key spacecraft for landing astronauts on the moon. Apollo 9. The lunar module was one of the most crucial pieces of the whole plan, and Apollo 9 was the first chance to test it in space. The crew tested how the module would separate from the command module, maneuver in space, and return safely, all essential steps for the actual moon landing. Apollo 9 proved that the lunar module could do all of this, confirming it was ready for future missions. Meanwhile, the Apollo 10 was basically a practice run for Apollo 11. Apollo 10 and 11. While it didn't actually land on the moon, it was the first mission to take astronauts close enough to the moon to test everything they'd need for the landing. They ran through the entire lunar landing sequence, except for the landing itself. This mission was crucial because it set the stage for Apollo 11, the one that would actually touch down on the moon and make history. But that's a whole different story, one that also ties into the question of why NASA never returned to the moon, which we'll dive into later. After Apollo 11's success, NASA sent out more crewed missions to the moon. These missions focused on exploring the lunar surface and studying its geology, which gave scientists a much deeper understanding of the moon's environment. Then, in December 1972, Apollo 17 launched, marking the final mission of the Apollo program. This was the sixth and last manned mission to the moon, and it also wrapped up the whole program. The crew spent 3 days on the moon, exploring the Taurus Littrow Valley, collecting samples, and running various scientific experiments. Apollo 17 also holds the title of the last time humans have traveled beyond Earth's orbit. It brought back the most extensive set of lunar samples ever collected, ending the era of human exploration of the moon. The mission itself was groundbreaking, but it also marked a significant turning point, as it was the last time NASA sent astronauts to the lunar surface. So, why didn't NASA go back? Well, there's a lot to do with the end of the Cold War and the moon race. The Cold War, which lasted from the end of World War II into the early 90s, wasn't just about politics or military power. It was about proving who was the top dog in almost every aspect of global influence. The space race between the United States and the Soviet Union was one of the most fascinating parts of this rivalry. It wasn't just about sending rockets into space. It was about showing off technological and scientific superiority while also pushing political and ideological agendas. For the US, it was all about capitalism and democracy. The space race wasn't just about being first. It was about proving that the American way of life was the best. That rivalry with the Soviet Union pushed both countries to make some of the greatest technological strides in history. While the US championed capitalism and democracy, the Soviet Union was all about communism and a state-controlled economy. The space race became an extension of this rivalry, with both countries eager to prove their way of life could lead to bigger and better achievements. It all kicked off when the Soviet Union launched Sputnik 1 on October 4, 1957. This was the world's first artificial satellite, and its success was a huge shock to the United States. Sputnik's launch showed that the Soviet Union had the ability to send a man-made object into space and orbit Earth. This raised serious concerns for the US about the technological and military power of the USSR. If the Soviets could send a satellite into space, could they also develop the technology to launch nuclear missiles from space? The launch of Sputnik was a wake-up call for the US, and the government scrambled to respond. President Eisenhower, worried about the technological gap between the two superpowers, saw the need for the US to invest heavily in science and technology. That's when NASA was created in 1958, as a direct response to the Sputnik launch. But the US wasn't just concerned with keeping up with the Soviets, they were also worried about national security. The fear of falling behind in a race that could have major implications, like space-based weapons, pushed the US to ramp up their space program quickly. While the US was playing catch-up, the Soviet Union wasn't slowing down. Space race, Cold War rivalry in the skies. They had a strong scientific and engineering community, and they made rapid progress in space exploration. This culminated in Yuri Gagarin's historic flight on April 12, 1961. Gagarin became the first human to orbit Earth, and his achievement was a major win for the Soviet space program. This was a huge moment in the space race, and it solidified the Soviets as serious contenders in the global rivalry. In the years that followed, the space race became one of the most defining features of the Cold War. Both countries poured vast amounts of resources into their space programs, each hoping to come out on top and prove their dominance. But space wasn't the only area where the US and the USSR were clashing. The Cold War was also marked by the arms race, where both sides built up massive stockpiles of nuclear weapons, each trying to have the upper hand in terms of firepower. The race for nuclear superiority wasn't the only intense competition between the US and the Soviet Union during the Cold War. Both countries were also fighting for global influence, supporting different factions in wars like the Korean and Vietnam Wars. Each side wanted to spread its political system and gain more allies around the world. But the space race offered a different kind of competition. It wasn't just about military power. It was about pushing the boundaries of human knowledge and exploration. Space exploration wasn't just about flexing military muscle. It was a way for both countries to show off their technological abilities and leadership. Achievements in space were seen as proof of superiority. If you could land a man on the moon or send spacecraft into orbit, it showed that your political system was strong enough to lead progress and success. While the Soviets initially had the upper hand in space, the US wasn't far behind, especially after NASA was formed. The US ramped up its efforts to improve its space capabilities, working on technologies for lunar exploration, with the ultimate goal of landing a man on the moon. But was competition the only thing driving space exploration? What stopped the US and the Soviets from returning to the moon after landing there? To really understand that, we have to look into the incredible achievement that was Apollo 11. Apollo 11, humanity's giant leap. Apollo 11 was launched atop the Saturn V rocket, the largest and most powerful rocket ever built. This massive machine stood 363 feet tall and weighed over 6 million pounds, capable of sending astronauts into lunar orbit. The mission's crew consisted of Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins. Armstrong was the commander, and Aldrin was assigned to walk on the moon's surface with him. Collins, the third member, stayed in lunar orbit aboard the command module, ready to bring his companions back safely once they completed their historic mission on the moon. The Apollo 11 mission was a huge deal, not just for space exploration, but for human ambition in general. It marked a moment in history when humanity took its first steps on the moon. The Apollo 11 crew was handpicked for their specific skills and experience, each one playing a key role in achieving the monumental task of landing on the moon. The journey to the moon itself took 4 days, and during that time, the astronauts went over their equipment, systems, and plans for the landing. When Apollo 11 finally reached the moon's vicinity, the spacecraft entered lunar orbit. Michael Collins, stationed in the command module, stayed in orbit around the moon, while Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin transferred to the lunar module, called Eagle. Their mission: land on the moon, explore for a few hours, collect samples, and then return to the command module before heading back to Earth. Once separated from Michael, Neil and Buzz started their descent. It was a long process, taking several hours, and the lunar module was equipped with an automated guidance system. But, as expected, the landing wasn't a walk in the park. Buzz had to manually steer the craft to avoid boulders and craters, finding a flat, safe area to touch down. As they neared the surface, Neil faced a big challenge. The landing site, identified by the automated system near the Sea of Tranquility, was filled with hazardous rocks. In a split-second decision, Neil took manual control of the module, guiding it to a smoother, safer spot. Once they landed, it was time to step outside. Neil Armstrong became the first human to set foot on the lunar surface. As he descended the ladder, he made history with the famous words, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." Those words were broadcast live to millions around the world, capturing the awe and wonder of humanity's greatest achievement at that time. Buzz followed him shortly after, and together, the two spent over 2 hours exploring the moon, collecting samples, and taking in the surreal landscape. Apollo 11 wasn't just a scientific or technological achievement, it was a major political victory during the Cold War. By landing on the moon, the US fulfilled President Kennedy's challenge to put a man on the moon by the end of the 1960s, securing a clear win in the space race. While the moon was a giant leap for humanity, Elon Musk has a different vision for our future in space. Why Elon Musk chooses Mars over the moon. Recently, Elon Musk shared his thoughts on why NASA hasn't returned to the moon in the last 50 years. Musk, whose deep passion for space is well known, has often focused more on Mars, which has captivated both the tech world and the space community. Elon Musk's obsession with Mars isn't just a phase, it's the foundation of his vision for the future of humanity. His dream isn't just about exploring space, it's about ensuring humanity survives and thrives in the long term. But why Mars? Why not the Moon, Venus, or some other place in space? Musk has a clear reason for this, and it all boils down to his belief that Earth is fragile. He points to things like climate change, natural disasters, and the potential for human-made catastrophes as existential threats that could wipe out civilization. For him, if humanity doesn't spread out into space, it's playing with fire. Musk often talks about humanity's survival relying on becoming a multi-planetary species, which means not putting all our eggs in one basket. If something were to happen to Earth, whether it's a giant asteroid impact or a major climate crisis, having colonies on other planets would make our species more resilient and able to bounce back. That's why he thinks Mars is the best bet for the future of human civilization. It's not just about being the closest planet to Earth that might support human life. It's also about the challenges and opportunities Mars presents. Mars stands out as the best candidate for colonization for a couple of big reasons. First, it has a 24-hour day cycle, which is almost identical to Earth's. This is huge because it makes the day-night rhythm much more familiar to humans. The temperature is cold but not unbearable, and the planet has the potential to be habitable in a way that other planets, including the Moon, can't offer. Elon has compared making life multiplanetary to creating a backup system for civilization. He imagines a future where we're not just sending rovers to Mars to collect soil samples, but we're building thriving colonies. On the other hand, Musk doesn't see the Moon as a practical place for long-term human settlement. Sure, it's closer to Earth, but it lacks many of the resources that would be essential for creating a self-sustaining colony. For one, the Moon doesn't have an atmosphere, making it harder to develop technologies that would allow us to live there long-term. Elon has pointed out that the Moon's gravity is only 1/6 of Earth's, which brings its own set of challenges. But more importantly, the Moon is just a barren, rocky wasteland with hardly any of the resources that could support a human settlement. Elon's main point is that while the Moon is interesting, it doesn't offer the same possibilities that Mars does. There's just not enough there to make it a viable place for people to live in a sustainable way. Mars, on the other hand, is a whole different ballgame. It has water ice beneath its surface, which is essential for drinking, growing food, and producing oxygen. Musk has often talked about how crucial water is for space exploration, and Mars seems to have more of it than the Moon. While the Moon does have some water ice in permanently shadowed craters at its poles, the amount is much less, and getting to it is a lot harder. In comparison, Mars offers better access to water, and its environment is more suited to human habitation in the long run. This makes Mars the clear target for Musk's vision of a human future in space. Mars has a lot going for it when it comes to making it a potential home for humans. One of the big reasons Elon Musk is so fixated on Mars is its gravity. Mars has about 38% of Earth's gravity, which is much better than the Moon, where gravity is only 1/6 of Earth's. Why does this matter? Well, microgravity, like the kind astronauts experience in space or on the Moon, can mess with the human body in pretty serious ways over time. Things like muscle and bone loss are big health risks during long periods in space or on the Moon. Mars's gravity is low enough to help mitigate those issues, making it a more suitable place for long-term habitation. But it's not just about gravity. Musk's vision for making Mars accessible. Elon's grand vision for Mars also revolves around making space travel way cheaper and more accessible. This is where SpaceX comes into play. SpaceX's main goal is to drastically reduce the cost of getting to space, which Elon sees as essential for making Mars colonization a reality. By developing reusable rockets like the Falcon 9 and the Starship program, SpaceX is changing the game. Reusability is a huge deal because it means rockets can be used multiple times, significantly lowering the cost of launching things into space. SpaceX's Starship is especially crucial to this vision. Starship is designed to be a fully reusable spacecraft, capable of carrying up to 100 passengers. This spacecraft would also bring along everything needed for those passengers to survive on Mars for extended periods, which is a big part of Musk's plan to make Mars a self-sustaining civilization. He's been pretty clear about his ambition, saying that he believes we could get to a point where this could happen in about 20 years. It's an incredibly ambitious goal, but if anyone's going to pull it off, It's Musk and his SpaceX team. What drives Elon Musk on a personal level when it comes to all of this is his deep desire to make a meaningful impact on humanity's future. Musk often talks about how important it is for people to have something big and ambitious to work toward. He sees space exploration as one of the few things that could unite people across the globe. The idea of humanity working together to make something as extraordinary as Mars colonization happen is something he believes could inspire people from all walks of life. It's about creating a shared purpose, something to strive for as a species. Elon Musk's vision for space exploration is also tied to his personal philosophy of taking bold, ambitious steps to ensure humanity has a future beyond Earth. He believes that if humanity is going to thrive long-term, we can't just rely on one planet. Spreading out into space and becoming a multi-planetary species is key to protecting humanity from existential threats. Now, when we look back at the history of space exploration, it's hard not to think about the Apollo missions. Unpacking Apollo. Why NASA stopped lunar missions. The United States landed on the moon 6 times between 1969 and 1972, with the Apollo missions bringing back hundreds of pounds of lunar rock and soil samples. It was a huge achievement, one of the most iconic moments in human history. But after Apollo 17, the last mission in 1972, NASA sort of pulled back from the moon. Even though the Apollo program had been a massive success, the US didn't send astronauts back to the moon for decades. One of the main reasons NASA halted the Apollo lunar missions was the massive cost. At its peak, the Apollo program ate up about $25 billion, which would be over $50 billion today when adjusted for inflation. The public's excitement about space exploration also started to fade. Sure, landing on the moon was a huge deal, but the thrill that accompanied the first few Apollo missions started to wear off. By the time Apollo 17 landed in 1972, it didn't feel as groundbreaking. On top of that, the US had a lot of other major issues on its plate, like the ongoing Vietnam War and a worsening economy, which made space exploration seem less pressing. As a result, public support for further lunar missions started to dwindle. Beyond the financial concerns, the political atmosphere in the US had shifted. The Apollo program was, in many ways, a product of the Cold War. It was about proving technological superiority in the space race against the Soviet Union. The US had put a man on the moon, showing the world that its political system could achieve such a massive goal. But once that objective was achieved, the political motivation to keep funding the program started to fade. Space exploration just wasn't the top priority anymore, and the momentum for further moon missions slowed down. But then, Elon Musk came along and threw a massive curveball. He shook up the world when he claimed he could reveal why NASA had never returned to the moon after the Apollo missions. According to Musk, NASA was hiding something, and the real reason for stopping the lunar missions was buried in the story of Apollo itself. He suggested that there might be classified information from the Apollo missions that had never been made public. This information, Musk hinted, could point to something significant that NASA discovered on the moon, something they weren't ready to face or share with the world. Elon's theory raised all kinds of wild possibilities. Could it be that NASA found something on the moon's far side? Something so extraordinary that they couldn't reveal it? He suggested the possibility of alien structures, untapped resources, or maybe even something more mysterious or ominous. Whatever it was, Musk believes that the truth has been hidden, and he's on a mission to uncover it. He's adamant that there's more to the story of the moon landings than we've been told, and he's determined to get to the bottom of it. For Musk, the Apollo missions weren't just about landing on the moon. They were about proving a point during the Cold War, and once that point was proven, the US lost interest. But with his bold plans for space exploration, especially his focus on Mars, Elon seems to think that there are still unanswered questions about what happened during those Apollo missions. He's not just out to build rockets and take people to Mars. He's interested in uncovering the secrets that NASA may have left behind on the moon. Elon Musk has reportedly instructed SpaceX to start preparing missions with a focus on the moon, not just to land humans there again, but to dig into the questions that have been left unanswered. Musk's mission to find the truth. According to him, we can't fully explore Mars until we have a better understanding of what NASA might have discovered on the Moon, or even why they never went back after the Apollo missions. Elon's vision is that SpaceX's advanced Starship program will bring us closer than ever to unlocking the Moon's secrets. Whether it turns out to be a huge, game-changing discovery, or just something long forgotten, Elon's quest to investigate the Moon has sparked a renewed debate. Why hasn't NASA returned to the Moon? And more importantly, what could they be hiding? In addition to Elon's theories, scientists have made some interesting new discoveries that have added more fuel to the fire. For one, they've found evidence of water and ice at the lunar poles, hidden in craters that are permanently in shadow. This could be a huge deal. Water is essential for human life, and if it can be extracted from the Moon, it could be used for drinking, turning into oxygen for breathing, or even hydrogen for rocket fuel. This water could make it possible for humans to have a long-term presence on the Moon. If we could set up lunar bases, the Moon could serve as a platform for deeper space exploration, all while being much closer than Mars. It's a tantalizing thought. The Moon, once considered a lifeless rock, may have resources that make it a viable stop for future missions. Moreover, the Moon is turning out to be more dynamic than we thought. Seismic activity has been detected, suggesting that there's still some internal movement beneath the surface. This seismic activity points to ongoing geological processes, which means that the Moon might not be as dead as we once believed. If there's still activity going on inside, it could hold important scientific secrets waiting to be uncovered. Another fascinating discovery has been rare geological formations on the Moon's surface. Scientists have found evidence of ancient volcanic activity and strange rock formations that suggest the presence of materials not found anywhere else in the solar system. These discoveries could be incredibly valuable for scientific research. Understanding how these materials formed could give us new insights into how planets, including Earth, formed. Plus, it could have serious implications for building future human settlements on the Moon. The more we learn about the Moon's geological past, the more we realize how much we still don't know about our nearest neighbor in space. What do you think? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and if you liked this video, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. See you in the next one.